Are we taking the right approach to the COVID-19 vaccine rollout? I'm joined today by Sylvie Thompson. She is Vice President Transformation with NTT Data Services. Hello, Sylvie.
Hello, how are you doing today?
Good. So what's wrong, in your estimation, with the current approach to vaccine distribution and administration?
Well, vaccinating the nation is going to require us to go community by community, neighborhood by neighborhood. We have to make sure we reach those most at risk, but also make sure we don't leave anybody behind. Stadium approach is a pretty broad, mega approach versus the local community. So to me, this is about trust. We have people that we have said for months, stay at home, don't get into large groups, don't even hug your grandchildren. And now we're saying, go to Dodger Stadium. So it's in some ways, I think we have to be very conscious of, the messaging that we said. And then the flip side is it's a supply chain. I as a supply chain will, take the perspective of, those mega sites become very complicated to manage. And that's what we're seeing in the supply chain.
Mm-hmm. Well, you would think they would be more efficient because you're making everybody go to one place instead of setting up all these others, as you refer to it, the Starbucks instead of stadium approach. Explain to me what the model is as you envision it, the so-called Starbucks approach. How would that work, and what would the locations be? Where would they be, and how many would they be, and all that?
Sure. What's interesting, one of the reasons why I love supply chain is some things are not always intuitive. And when you think about smaller local sites, particularly when you have limited supply, which is what we have limited supply, we have a complex vaccination process that requires 2 doses by the same manufacturer. And we don't really have an infrastructure, a permanent infrastructure in place to manage this. So we kind of have to think in ways of how can I do this most efficiently? How can I do this somewhat low tech? How can I manage it with the most amount of consistency and make it successful? And small sites do that. If you think about last mile, so when I look at this problem, what I see resembles a direct to consumer supply chain. And those supply chains are heavily dominated by last mile. You need to execute on the last mile piece of it. And one of the things, if you look at last mile in general, if you look at providers of last mile services, if you look at the Amazons of the world, even Walmarts of the world, they've all gone to urban fulfillment centers, get as close as you can, and tackle things in smaller bite-sized chunks. And one of the reasons why is those sites allow you to establish what we refer to in supply chain as pull chains. If I know that I have 10,000 sites in the state of Virginia and each one can process 500 vaccines a day, hypothetical, I know exactly how much inventory I need. I know how many, and then I create, 1,000 routes, and each route has it's a static route. I can actually start backing up the entire chain and say, okay, today I need to deliver to 500 sites, each site needs an expert. It's math. One of the reasons why I love supply chain is at the end of the day, supply chains are complex math problems. And if you can reduce the variability in each component of that chain, you become more efficient. And that's kind of, to me, that's what I see when you go small local versus many sites.
Certainly for the individual receiving the dose, you can't argue that. I mean, your proposal is definitely preferred. I would rather go to a small site where there were a limited number of people and maybe it was more appointment oriented than go to Dodger Stadium, obviously. But explain, what would these sites be? Would they be storefronts? Would they be clinics? Would they be private homes? Would they be retail outlets? Tell me, pharmacies? What exactly?
I think, to me, all of the above. I mean, West Virginia is a great example. They opted to go with independent pharmacists who not only are you coming to the independent pharmacist location, but they are getting in their car and going sites to sites, and they have a schedule and they have a plan. The Starbucks, my intent when I said Starbucks versus stadiums is you need to get to sites that people trust
Mhm.
and that are close to all of us so that you don't leave any sub-communities behind. And Starbucks has become, let's face it, our trusted meeting place. It's, we meet our friends, we go there to work, we go there to create creativity.
Mhm.
These sites can be the local coffee shop. They could be a local church. They could be a community center. They could be, an independent restaurant in town, in a small rural town. You need to go to where people feel most comfortable and where you can establish a consistent site.
Yeah.
And we need to be more creative. And the reality is we do need to be more creative. This is the capacity that we need to do this. This endeavor is, if you assume all the vaccines are going to be 2 doses, and to get to herd immunity, you're trying to administer 500 million plus vaccines in, a 6 to 8 month window. Nobody has that capacity. No industry is sitting with surplus last mile capacity or administration capacity. And so we need to be creative, and we're going to have to pull from all sorts of places, whether that's food services, whether that's churches, whether that's retailers. I use Starbucks, another great example. Think of Walmart. Walmart, 90% of all households are within 10 miles of a Walmart, and something like 95% of households shop at Walmart. There's all sorts of creative solutions. It's just pulling those solutions.
Okay. So, but more locations, does that not mean more health professionals needed than under a so-called stadium approach? And do you believe we have the sufficient numbers of trained healthcare professionals to spread out over these thousands and thousands of locations?
Regardless of whether you stick with the stadium or the individual, I'm still vaccinating people. So I can't really comment on total numbers of people registered to give a vaccine. Is it likely that we all need to be creative? Definitely. Walmart, when I brought up Walmart, also mentioned that they have launched a extensive training program in order to teach and certify even more people than just their pharmacy organization to administer vaccines. So regardless, we need to be creative with that.
Yeah.
So, but whether I have 50 people in a large site or 1 or 2 people in another site, at the end of the day, we still have to give 500 million doses or more.
Okay, but you also need not just the training to administer the shot, you also need the training to handle the vaccine itself under extremely sensitive temperature conditions. That would require more training at these various places. Does that pose a particular challenge, do you think?
To me, that's where we need to pull from those who are experts in this area. That's where you need to go to, the Starbucks, the Walmarts. They all have cold chains. Once it's out of the regional state's facility, it's now in a transportation container, and that needs to be managed. So to me, leveraging those individuals also makes the most sense. They're the ones who are used to track and trace. They're used to handling special products. They're used to delivering, products every day to thousands and thousands of locations.
So you don't think, what about the problem? This is a problem that exists no matter how you go about distributing or administering the drug, and that is the problem of reaching outlying, distant rural areas versus urban centers. Do you believe that your model does a better job of doing that, or is it a challenge either way?
I think going the small local will actually have more success in vaccinating the maximum number of people and making sure we do not leave behind any communities, whether those are subset communities in urban areas or rural areas. The nation cannot get back to some resemblance of openness until we get to to the entire population, or at least herd immunity, and those who want to get vaccinated are vaccinated. We can't just vaccinate urban centers and then expect the whole country to open up. We can't just vaccinate subgroups who have the ability, who maybe, have a smartphone or can get online to book their appointment. We need to be more creative with that. So that, to me, fundamentally, the number of resources you need to do mega sites versus small sites is relatively the same. It's the effectiveness, and that is, I think, is what we're missing, is the effectiveness of that. Small sites also allow you to control the distribution of that item.
Yeah.
You go to a large site, once you've released, tens of thousands of doses at a mega site, you've lost a lot of control over that particular inventory at the end of the day. Has it been handled correctly? Did you use it all? Did we run out? You can do that far more effectively. And as I said, I know sometimes things in supply chain are not always intuitive, but the smaller model to get to where we need to go as quick as we can, I think the smaller model is more effective.
The scale of the challenge is unprecedented, at least for the last 100 years. Can you draw on any past experiences of somewhat smaller scale, previous types of pandemics, previous models for administering vaccines that can teach us lessons about how to go about doing it now? Or are we just on unexplored territory and just, trying to figure things out without any precedent on which to rely?
I don't believe there's any precedent to this. As you said, maybe the closest it would be World War II or the Spanish flu ahead of time. In the modern world, even if you looked at smaller outbreaks in Ebola and other stuff, nothing has ever been. This is and in some ways I think it also helps explain why there's been so many struggles. This is unprecedented. This is the largest single supply chain challenge we in the modern world have ever faced. And I also think that's also why sometimes we need to be a little bit more creative. Sometimes the best solutions are not necessarily the ones that are sitting back in front of us. Sometimes we need to look at alternatives.
Well, certainly what you are proposing, Sylvie Thompson, is highly creative and sounds like it could be a good alternative. And perhaps if we might be able to adopt this and get more people vaccinated more quickly and back into health and back into normal. But in the meantime, Sylvie Thompson of NTT Data Services, thank you so much for talking to me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.